Good afternoon, everyone. How y'all doing? My name is Brent Reedy. I'm the director of the research libraries for the New York Public Library. So I'm not Gary, Stephen, or Jen. You can applaud for the library. Yeah. So I'm here to give a brief introduction today from my position of overseeing one of the largest and most used research collections in the world. We have 46 million items, depending on how you count it. That includes the Columbus letter that was published, the last remaining copy, announcing the European finding of the New World, Jefferson's copy of the Declaration of Independence, Martin Luther King's briefcase. I mean, we have everything. We have mountains of truth. And we are deeply worried about the future of truth and the future of research libraries as AI is growing. We're going to talk about that future today, but since they invited a historian with a PhD to the stage, I'm actually going to talk about Plato for a minute and the Republic, and go back to 375 BC. So probably the most well-known bit from the Republic is the allegory of the cave. I'm seeing lots of nods. Great. So as a reminder for those who haven't read it recently, the allegory is about how we understand truth in reality. There are people in a cave, they are chained, and all they can see is the wall in front of them. Behind them is a fire, and objects are being carried in front of the fire, and all they can see is the reflection, the projection of the shadow on the wall in front of them. They believe that is the real world. That's everything they understand about the real world. 2,400 years later, the metaphor still stands up, if not more so. It's actually amazing how little you know directly. Every aspect of the world that we know, the truths that we think we know, are mediated in some way, whether it's through a journal, through a friend's mouth, through a newspaper, through something else. And what we are now stepping towards is a future in which AI and large language models and their hallucinations might be the brightest flame behind us that is going to influence the projection of and the understanding of every piece of truth that we might be encountering and wondering whether or not it is true. So how terrified should we be of that future? Are we at some tipping point where the very nature of what is truth might be changing overnight? That's not for me to answer, but it is for our panel today to dig into. So without further ado, please allow me to welcome Jen Reedy to the stage, our moderator and the founder of the Sway Effect.
Hi. We're going to do some conversation. I'm going to save the last 15 minutes for Q&A so everybody has a chance to ask these gentlemen some questions. So, as you said, I am Jen Reedy. I am the founder of the Sway Effect. We are a PR agency focused on driving brand reputation while putting D&I at the center of everything we do. I've been spending a lot of time at South by. I spoke at the Female Quotient, and I'm an advocate for inclusion. And I actually wrote an op-ed in Fastco that published last Friday about how women are overlooked in AI. So I'm very interested in this topic. We're going to talk about AI. We're going to talk about truth. As you all know, AI has accelerated the need to re-examine and redefine what truth means in today's polarized and digitally manipulated world. We continue to see examples of where AI is being used for bad, so how can we flip the script and use it for good? And what role will AI continue to play in the future of truth? We're going to get all into that today. I am joined by two leaders in the technology world. First, Gary Marcus, a scientist, best-selling author, and serial entrepreneur who's been addressing and challenging issues tied to modern AI. And you also might have caught him last May testifying at the US Senate with Sam Altman. Hi, Gary. And also Steve Rosenbaum, an entrepreneur, author, and currently a student who's looking at this very topic. He is also a 5-time startup founder and led the New York City Media Lab at NYU before forming the Sustainability Media Center with a board of tech, media, and Gen Z leaders. But before we dive in, I would like to also thank our event presenters, the New York Public Library and the Sustainable Media Center, as well as our sponsor, Craig Newmark of the Craig Newmark Philanthropies. Gentlemen, question one. Before we get into the impact of AI, let's start with some level setting. What is truth, and is there a simple definition that we can all agree on? Steve, why don't you start?
Those were two separate questions. I'll answer the first one, and Gary can answer the second one.
I don't want either of them. Those are hard.
So people don't get this. Truth is two really different things. There's objective truth and subjective truth. And the one that I think we care about for this conversation today is objective truth. It's 1 + 1 = 2. It's science. It's things that can be proven. Subjective truth is, that's a really cool jacket,
Thank you.
which I believe. And you obviously are wearing it, so you believe. But other people are like, oh, I don't like that jacket. Subjective truth we can set off to the side because it's not an AI problem. But objective truth is. Did I mess that up?
I mean, I can live with that. I think a lot of people now fight back on any notion of truth at all. I mean, we're in the era where people talk about alternative facts, but that's actually itself bullshit. There are tons of facts that most people agree on. There's some very interesting research by David Rand at MIT showing that if you crowdsource most things most of the time, even people with different political parties actually agree. So there's a lot of ground truth out there, and we're faced with a social media empire that doesn't really care about that truth. But I think there are lots of objective facts we can agree on, and then there are gray zones, and people like to have slippery slope arguments, and they're like, well, if we can't agree about your jacket, then there's nothing to talk about. And that's ridiculous. We don't have to agree about your jacket to know that people are getting killed in a particular place or whatever. So there are lots of objective facts out there in the world, and we would like for our media to report them. We would like to live in an information ecosphere where most of what we get most of the time is truth. And I think the reason we're gathered here today is because AI is threatening that fundamental assumption that most of what you hear most of the time will be true. It's already caused great harm because AI has driven social media feeds, which have driven us away from truth, driven us away from traditional journalism where fact-checking was valued, to aggregation where fact-checking is not really valued. So that was sort of, if there's a 1-2 punch, that was number one. And number two is it's now trivially cheap to generate misinformation, fake books, deep-faked videos, and so forth, that completely undermine the information ecosphere. And the question is, where are we going to be with all of this, where it's going? Is anybody going to believe anything is true? Are people going to give up on that notion altogether, like Putin has wanted all along, for us to live in a world where we don't trust anything?
Yeah, the scary word that we'll end up getting to is this word post-truth. We'll set that off to 15 minutes from now.
I have a whole list of prepared questions, but I want to ask, we've all seen over in the last 24 hours, there was a lot of conversation around this Kate Middleton picture. And there's been a lot of theories, what's going on with Kate. I want to get both of your take on, there's been a lot of conversation. What do you think's going on?
So someone photoshopped the picture. And if they'd done it well, we wouldn't know it. I mean, that's the interesting thing about the two news organizations that flagged it. They didn't flag it because algorithmically it had been detected as being, they flagged it because it looked so bad they noticed it. This idea that we live in a world in which seeing is believing is maybe an old notion that should have gone away a long time ago. I'm puzzled by why they changed it and then kind of didn't quite explain what they did, but I can't figure out what the underlying drama is.
I didn't follow all of the details. I think we are in a world where anybody can make any kind of fakery, and we all know that now. And the question is, how we react to that as a society. So in the best case, we're entering a world where everybody will be a more critical thinker, where everybody will realize that you need to source things, that we still should value places that actually themselves, media outlets that value that when you see something weird, you should say something and look and find out. And so, the positive outcome here would be not a post-truth society, but one where people are more skeptical, more critical, and anything that doesn't quite sit right, they're like, I need to find out more. I need to go to trusted sources. And then the alternative is this post-truth world where people just give up and they say, I don't know, I don't care. I'm just going to believe what I want to believe. I'm going to ask my friends and screw it all. And I don't think democracy can function under the latter. I think there's a lot at stake.
Gary, another question for you. Truth can be messy. We're seeing a lot of that with fake news and other things that are going on. Why isn't AI a wonderful solution for everything going on?
Because, well, it could be someday, but the AI that we have right now, as it happens, is better at making up bullshit. As I wrote 3 years ago, I just looked up the quote, I called it a fluent spouter of bullshit, and that is still true. You know, if you work with ChatGPT or Claude or any of these things, and you ask it to generate your own biography, for example, it will make up what colleges you went to and maybe who your advisors were, and it will all sound fine. My favorite example is somebody wrote a biography of me with, I think it was ChatGPT, and it alleged that I had a pet chicken named Henrietta from whom I drew inspiration. And then I spoke about this in Germany, and someone else helped me track down what had happened. So I don't have a pet chicken, and if I did, I wouldn't name her Henrietta or him. But somebody wrote a book. There was a children's book about a character named Henrietta, and the illustrator was named Gary. I'm Gary Marcus, and he's Gary Oswald or something like that. And these systems just put together random bits of statistics. So they break everything they see into little tiny bits, and then they reconstruct them. Sometimes they plagiarize, because plagiarism is actually the most probable outcome. And sometimes they just make stuff up, and they are literally indifferent to truth. Like sometimes they wind up with truth because the statistics line up, and sometimes they don't. In my TED talk last year, I gave an example where one of these systems said Elon Musk died in a car crash. Well, that's because, you know, some people owning Teslas died in car crashes, and he owns some of Tesla. But that's too subtle a nuance for these systems to understand, and they can't fact check. They literally don't know how to go out, let's say, to Wikipedia and say, is there any evidence that Elon Musk is dead? And well, no, there isn't. In fact, he's on Twitter every day, or X every day. He's reported in the news. If anybody is alive, it's Elon Musk. But the systems can't do that kind of reasoning. That's just not part of what they do. Now, does that mean no AI could do fact checking? No, it doesn't mean that at all. It means that the particular tools that we have right now, which are like these big piles of statistics that you stir, they're not very good at that. We might invent something better. I hope we'll invent something better. I've been trying to encourage people to work on other things, but the dynamics of power right now are that people who are making these statistical things are very popular, have a lot of money, and everything else is getting starved. So we're not doing the right kind of research to actually build automated fact checkers that work. And people are fantasizing that somehow they'll get a large language model to do that, and that just doesn't follow from how they actually work.
This is the place, you and I have had this conversation now 3 times, and I keep waiting to find the middle ground. This is where I think we actually disagree, because I don't want it to be better.
You don't want the fact checking to be better? What don't you want to be better?
As long as it's crappy, it doesn't damage our world.
No. I completely disagree. So we do actually have a crappy AI is very damaging to the world in many ways. So one is, if you have a system that doesn't know what the truth is, it can easily be exploited to make disinformation, and that is happening. If you have a system that doesn't know anything about Kate Middleton or the background, I should be careful because I don't know the examples there, then it will make up anything. It's very easy to now train these systems to do that. Another example is these systems have all kinds of hidden bias. There was a paper came out last week showing that there's covert racism in these things. So if you speak to it in African American English as opposed to standard English, you will get like different answers to questions like, how long should a jail term be for this crime? So there's all kinds of crap in these systems we have no control over, and yet they're being adopted by everybody. That's a tragedy.
Let me try my theory, and then you can both beat me up because I'm sitting in the middle. So there are all these things about truth that are inherently messy, and I would argue that they make them incredibly human. So the example of that I'll give 2 really quick.
Well, hold on. I mean, do you want your calculator to be incredibly human? Right? Or do you want your calculator to not be very messy? Do you want your calculator to always tell you what 3 times 16 is? Or do you want it to be like a little human? Sometimes it forgets to carry the 1.
If AI were actually Excel spreadsheets, that would be fine. But here's my answer. So you go to see your doctor, and your doctor finds a result of a test and says, now your doctor is going to tell you the truth. But they're going to tell you a version of the truth that's going to have some version of who you are, how well they know you, what other medical issues you've had, how well you tolerate bad. Like, they're going to moderate the way they tell you the information based on a human interaction with you as a person. At the same time, you go to a court and you listen to the nature of the justice system is inherently messy. It's actually often quite shitty. AI comes in and says, listen, we can turn this into a math problem. You did this bad crime. These are the number of years. We have this evidence. We've looked at blah, blah, blah. So robo-judge says guilty, jail, period. the nature of truth in our society is nuanced and human. And
I think you need to be careful there. So it is true that there are some ways in which we want, for example, medical systems to be very personalized. I'm not sure we want our news to be personalized in the same way. So for example, there was a fake news story that Netanyahu's, and he's not my favorite person, just to be clear, but Netanyahu's psychiatrist committed suicide. Only the person, and that Netanyahu drove him to it. Only thing is, the psychiatrist didn't exist. Netanyahu didn't actually drive this person to commit suicide. Now, some personalization of news for some people would be like, give me those stories. I want to be pissed off at Netanyahu. Bring it. Tell me. And that's not really how I want the news to run. I mean, you know, in his particular case, I'm really not a fan. But I don't think, you know, I don't want anybody to be subject to kind of callous defamation, and yet, you know, a lot of people would probably, you know, set the dial that way if they had the opportunity.
But wouldn't you argue that that's what Facebook newsfeed already is?
Yeah, it's a disaster. I don't want it to be even worse. I think Facebook newsfeed is one of the worst things that happened to society because it has polarized us. We can't have decent conversations about anything anymore as a society. I think it's been a disaster.
And Sam Altman is now saying TikTok is going to be his source.
Well, Sam Altman's going to take every source he can, but I guess TikTok is one of them. He also wants to take like your email from your Microsoft account. I mean, he wants to use everything. And if I can just push on that just one little bit, one of the things that's really insidious about that is there's already some research. Moore Naman at Cornell Tech has done some of this work, showing that you can have subtle biases in your chatbot interactions. People don't notice it, and it can affect their political beliefs and so forth. So, you know, having your finger on all that data and on that dial, deliberately, it can be done in you know, accidental ways, just in terms of data sources or whatever, is enormous power. I mean, we were all worried about whether Zuckerberg would put his finger on the scale in order to affect, you know, 2016, 2020, and so forth. Altman, if things keep going in this path, is going to have far more power to do that in much more subtle ways that nobody notices. That is not going to bring us to a truth society. That's going to bring us to a mess.
Well, I'm going to ask both of you before we move on to the next question. Where do you both get your news?
Oh, that's
I had to ask.
That's a personal question.
It is.
Everybody wants to know.
Theoretically, I like to think that I read a lot. I read all the time. I read the New York Times. I watch lots of cable television. I read the Wall Street Journal. I occasionally read the New York Post. I read a lot of Twitter. I read a lot on various other social media. But what I want to be able to tell you is that I read things that are politically disaligned with my beliefs. And I try and do that, and I find it incredibly hard. But I want to get better.
I mean, I read things that I disagree with to keep my mind sharp.
Me too.
How did they slant this? Like, I probably don't believe it. What is the rhetorical move here? So I do read some stuff that I disagree with. I am closer to the Times than I am to Fox News. I'll be honest about that. But I'll do both. And I've been on Fox News 4 times in the last year, and I'm happy to, to talk across the aisle. And I think that that's important.
I'm going to move us on a little bit. I bet everyone in this room has used AI, maybe uses it a lot. Why aren't the answers that ChatGPT is giving us great?
I mean, that's a fundamental thing about the technology. I mean, there are 2 problems with the technology. So one of them is this explosion of things into statistical bits that I talked about. So you don't have in these things a database where you can actually look things up. So you make approximations, and that just leads to all kinds of errors. It leads to errors on arithmetic. It leads to errors on anything social or political. So you have an intrinsically unreliable technology. It is not built to be a database. It's really something different, and people are confusing it with that. So that's one problem. And then you have this whole apparatus of guardrails, and it's very difficult to get the guardrails right, and everybody has screwed up on them. The only time I've been on late-night television, I wasn't personally on, but I had a Twitter joke where ChatGPT, I asked it, and this really did happen, I said, what would be the gender of the first Jewish president? And it said, well, it's impossible to give an answer to that question. People can be presidents of any gender. I'm like, any religion. I'm like, no, I asked you the religion for the Jewish president. It doesn't really understand the words Jewish president, and so it just comes up with garbage. And stuff that we saw last week with the Google had founding fathers that were African American that didn't really happen and so forth. There's another example of this, that people don't really know how to make guardrails. To do that, you would need genuinely intelligent systems, and we don't have that. We're faking that. And so you add the 2 levels of fakery, and you're going to get a lot of garbage.
Steve?
So I argue with ChatGPT, and my wife will literally come over to the computer and be like, "Are you arguing with the chatbot again?" I'm like, it makes me rage, which I don't feel that way about Google. When I make a search, it gives me an answer. I look at the answers. I'm working on a book right now about the future of truth, and so I asked ChatGPT to give me some quotes of Supreme Court justices about truth. And it gave me 5 wonderful quotes, and I asked the question again, and I said, give me 5 Supreme Court justice quotes, and give me the sources. And it gave me a whole series of quotes and links. The links were all made up, and the quotes
I'll do you one better on
the
that.
quotes were all totally fake.
I'm going to give you one better on that. Lexus Nexus is one of the best known legal information sources, and every lawyer knows what it is. And they recently promised that they were going to have a hallucination-free chatbot device. And somebody sent me an example the other day. A law professor sent me, he said, you might find this interesting. So he asked Lexus Nexus hallucination-free chatbot to give him some cases. I forget on what topic. And it came back with cases from 2025 to 2026.
Yeah. Can I ask the audience a question?
Go for it.
All of this comes down to really whether the data that these chat engines are using are based on information. How many of you today, if I were to ask, and I'm willing to pay $10, would you text me right now your PIN number? Okay, I'm going to raise it to $1,000. I'm going to make it $50,000. Okay, there's a couple hands went up. I'm going to make it $500,000.
Do they get to change it afterwards?
Well, yeah, right away. But I'm gonna move fast, and they're gonna have to move fast. My point is, we're already feeding the machine all our data. By the way, it's paying us nothing. So you've all essentially made that transaction. Probably your PIN number somewhere, and then lots of other things about what you eat, where you shop, where you go, who you love, where you work. I mean, all that data is out there.
And do you know your cars do this too? Like basically, if you bought a car in the last 10 years, you signed terms of service, and they can upload your text messages now according to one legal decision. So like everywhere you drive. So like cars can be making guesses about your sex life based on where you go at night and things like that. It's an insane amount of data that people basically give away for free.
It seems safe because you talk to your doctor about health and you talk to your grocery store about food. But the reality is Gary, to his wisdom, when we were going to do this panel, actually read the South by Southwest terms and conditions, and I thought to myself, there's a real scientist for you. Well done. Like, I do not read terms. But we've already agreed that Sam Altman, for some amount of money, can get all of that data and then turn it into a single being where it will know literally more about you than you know about yourself.
I want to open up the next question to either one of you. What is your least favorite myth about AI, and how does the truth play a role in this?
And how does truth play? I mean, my least favorite myth is the myth that we're close to artificial general intelligence. And a lot rests on that. So for example, policies people are making in Washington, I think, are based on a lie. And the lie is that we're close to artificial general intelligence, that if China gets this thing that we're building right now, that we'll be immeasurably behind. And so there's all this kind of fear and so forth, which is in turn giving more and more power to these AI companies that I think are being irresponsible about it. And so I think a lot depends on people believing the hype that these systems are very close to being something that they really are not.
I think, look, we live in a moment in time that's enormously complicated in terms of data. I mean, we remember when there was a time that you could actually get on the phone and book an airplane ticket or cancel your cable bill or get a medical prescription filled. And you've all battled with this mess of, no, use our app and our app. I think there is a myth that AI will make that better, that we can make that pain go away. If you would just sign up for the data and feed it all to us, the machine will talk to you in your language. I'll just give you one example. When we go to a store and we're looking at a piece of clothing. You know, we put on a shirt or a jacket, and the salesperson says to you, "That looks good on you." You know what? I have that same jacket at home. Like, we know that's not true. We know they don't care what it looks like on you, and it probably doesn't look good on you. They just, their job is, at the end of the day, when AI gets really good at being charming and lovely and knowing your language and your tone and you like people to speak, it's going to be such a good parrot, such a brilliant repetitive parrot that you will not want to talk to people anymore because the robot will be better.
Gary, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier about guidelines and guardrails specifically. Can you weigh in on the need for ethical and responsible AI?
I think there's a huge need. I think the default here is irresponsible AI, just like the default with social media was irresponsible social media. So social media, I think, maybe started with good intentions, or at least not terrible intentions. But over time, it has become clear, for example, that it polarizes people radically. Because we have this attention economy, right? So what has happened with social media is that systems or companies are rewarded by provoking argument and not caring about truth and so forth. Well, what's happening with AI is, again, the natural temptation is to be as irresponsible as possible. Companies don't, for example, want to pay copyright to any of the artists or writers that they're clearly ripping off. Right? I mean, that is very irresponsible. If Sam Altman has talked about, wanting AI to fight injustice, but then he's, using all of this work that artists and writers have done and not compensating them. That's not responsible AI. The fact that all of these systems apparently are covertly racist and none of the major companies has addressed this research that has come out, that's not responsible AI. I should give a little context here that you didn't, which is I love AI. And I, in fact, built an AI company that I sold to Uber before I think we had the kind of current technologies. I've been working on it since I was 8 years old. I would like to see AI help us with science, with medicine, with climate change technology, and so forth. And I think I've talked a lot of trash about AI on the table. On the panel today, I really want it to work, but there is a difference between using AI, releasing it when it is mature, and we know that we can handle the problems around misinformation and cybercrime and so forth, and just releasing it to 100 million people with no idea. I mean, you would not call a drug company that just skipped phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trials and said, we're going to put it out there and see what happens. Everybody can use it. I mean, we would think that that's not responsible, right? So, always responsibility is going to come partly from companies and partly from checks and balances, from having government require things. But what the Silicon Valley is trying to tell us right now is we don't want any checks and balances. Just trust us. And that's insane. Why should we trust them? Look what they did with social media and what the effect that it's had, for example, on teenage girls. Like, we shouldn't be trusting these people.
I think really it comes down to the business model. And you just have to remember, I mean, if you go back to the early days of all of this technology that we're all here kind of reveling in and fearful of, AI in ways that other tech didn't, its core moment of being born was essentially to turn us into the product.
Turn us what?
Into the product. I mean,
Well,
we're going to put
can I
information.
interject one thing? I think that AI really goes back to the 1950s. There was a famous Dartmouth summer conference with Marvin Minsky and John McCarthy and Herb Simon. Those guys were not thinking about commercial product at all. They were not thinking about harvesting anybody's data. They were like, it'd be really cool if we could get computers to do the kinds of things that people do, and maybe it would save us some labor and it would advance science. And for most of my life, that's what most people in AI did. Through the 80s, people were like, maybe we can do machine translation. Nobody was thinking we can hoover up all this data and target advertisements to people. I mean, even when Google was founded, they were just trying to make a search engine. They only thought about ads afterwards. And, as a business model, when Google started, it was just like, let's make all the world's information available. That's one of the cool things we can do with AI. There was a real shift in the last 20 or so years towards, hey, we can make a ton of money with this. And that has really changed the agenda. It's changed the research agenda. It's changed how it's used. So, for sure right now, most of the people involved in AI are about the money. But it wasn't always that way. And a lot of people were just, this is an intellectually interesting question. Like, how do children learn language? Can we get a machine to do that?
But I would argue the difference between Google and OpenAI, for example, is even if the first 2.5 pages of responses on Google say sponsored, at least you know the ones that are sponsored. When you get to OpenAI, the answer is every one of them is sponsored.
Yeah, I mean, there's an interesting subtle point there that's
not
worth.
sponsored, but profit driven.
I mean, we don't quite know that yet. When I testified at the Senate, by the way, I had already given Sam a hard time once. I really wanted to say something smart-assed and didn't, but I'll tell it to you, which is the famous line is Zuckerberg was asked by the senators, how do you make money, basically? And Zuckerberg says, Senator, we sell ads. So they asked Sam the same question, and he kind of like mumbled and whatever. I wanted to say, in other words, what he's saying is, Senator, we might sell ads. So they don't yet.
Yes,
but
they don't yet.
the really interesting thing about generative search, we don't have a name for it, but this thing that like you will search by talking to ChatGPT, what's really interesting about it is it doesn't give you links, or it doesn't reliably give you links. There's some ways to maybe unreliably give links, but the assistants don't really know where they get their answers from. So Google at least gives you a link, and you can go there and you can say, well, this is a crappy site, I don't trust it. But ChatGPT gives everything with full authority. I learned this great phrase from the military: frequently wrong, never in doubt. Everything that it says absolute certainty, that has happened, and it doesn't give you a source. And so, like, you don't know where it got that garbage from. So they may, in fact, sponsor it. People are, in fact, doing research. Like, how can we, manage to embed the word Coca-Cola in an innocuous and comfortable way and make some revenue? And we may see a whole lot of that kind of product placement and stuff coming soon. I don't think it's happened so much yet.
Google Maps now routinely shows you fast food restaurants on when you're on the highway, and never local restaurants.
There's something in China now. They're taking videos and they're, after the fact, taking old videos and putting like billboards and stuff like that. So you see a Coca-Cola ad in what looks like an authentic video from 1982, and they've actually added it after the fact. So there's gonna be more and more of that.
You've talked a little bit about, testifying at the Senate. When it comes to legislation, both in the U.S. and in Europe, who's getting it right and what needs to be done to regulate what's going on?
That's an easy question. Europe is mostly getting it right, and the United States isn't doing anything yet. So I'll put some qualifications around that. Europe just passed the EU AI Act. It's not perfect. There are a lot of questions about enforcement and what's going to look like. We all know the GDPR did some things wrong. We have to press those stupid cookie boxes and stuff like that. So it's not perfect. But by and large, they have tried to protect their citizens from all the kinds of harms that you might think about, like around misinformation, cybercrime, and so forth. The United States, the Biden administration, I think, has done a pretty good job within the parameters they have, which is that they are the executive branch. They're not the legislative branch, so they can't pass laws, and they had to be very careful about what they did. If they tried to do something that looked like they were passing a law, it would get shot down in the Supreme Court. So that leaves it to our legislature. And ultimately, that leaves it to Senator Chuck Schumer, who is the Senate Majority Leader. And so far, he hasn't put anything forward. He's supposed to, by my sources, do so in the next few weeks. But so far, we don't have anything right now that protects artists from having their stuff ripped off, except the existing copyright law, but we don't have a clear ruling about that. We don't have anything that protects people in a clear enough way about employment bias. We don't have anything that protects us really about non-consensual deepfake porn. We don't have anything that protects us from deepfake political ads. We've got nothing. Or that's exaggerated, but we have like the FTC trying to take the powers that it already has and modernize them for the future. So we have something, but we have very little that's been like well thought through with respect to the current era in the United States. So we're behind on that one.
So I was at Dick Durbin's Senate hearing about teen safety with the terribly sad moment where the parents are all holding pictures of their children that committed suicide. That seems to have driven some bipartisan consensus to do something. And there is a law that feels like it might actually get to the floor that could be meaningful and would be the first time the federal government has tested whether or not it actually has the cojones to get it done.
But if I still feel like Charlie Brown and Lucy in the football, you can't really blame me. Like, maybe people aren't old enough to get the reference. She's holding up the football, and he's always taking away from Charlie Brown. Like, so many times the Senate has promised to do things. Like, everybody in the Senate, as far as I can tell, agrees that Section 230 shields social media companies from liability too much. When I testified in the Senate, bipartisan consensus in the room, there were probably 15 or 16 senators there that day. Pretty much any of them that said anything about it was opposed to 230. They said that again at Durbin's hearing that you were at last week. But Section Section 230 is still here. There's, like maybe the Senate will do things, but maybe they just like having sound bites and like, I will see it or believe it when I see it. I hope that my cynicism here is misplaced and that we will start to see action. But I think we, the citizens, have to stand up and say, we really want you to do something about this. We're really not happy with the situation.
I mean, the problem with the current state, particularly of social media, is that the bad behavior is just wildly, unbelievably profitable. And so what it comes down to is you can say you're going to make changes that are going to affect this industry, and then people go, yeah, but, the stock market. So maybe we'll just not, but moderately hopeful that something's going to happen.
I mean, for someone like me, I work in PR, I deal with the media every day. I see, literally, it seems like the government is really favoring, as always, big tech, and they're not protecting the content creators, and there's a lot of false promises. It shouldn't be this hard.
It shouldn't.
We,
the people, need to stand up. We have to say, we know you get all that lobbying money, but we care. Like, I think not enough people in society realize how damaging social media has been, and they don't realize how damaging AI is going to be, and they don't realize how little time we have to get this right. I mean, the big problem with social media is the Senate took too long to do anything.
Right.
And, by the time anybody kind of realized there's a problem, it was too much entrenched financially, legally, et cetera. We're headed down the same path with AI. If we don't get it right in the next couple of years, everybody's going to be like, boiled frogs, and we're going to be stuck.
If you talk to parents who have teenage children, there's 100% concern about their children, their safety, their sense of well-being, their dangers of mental health. I mean, there's no debate on that subject among parents.
Gary, let's talk about AI development. We're currently battling with existing technology, but what about tomorrow's software? What are the watch-outs that you feel are the most important that must go into the future of AI?
I mean, I don't think the AI is going to fundamentally advance in the next couple of years because I think everybody is focused on large language models. And in the long term, I think that's actually slowing us down. But eventually, we will have stronger AI, and we will accord it more and more power over our world, controlling nuclear weapons conceivably, and power grids, and so forth, controlling our cars, which we have demos of, but we don't really have. And it may get smarter. Like, it's perfectly possible it might get smarter. And we have to reckon with the fact that right now we have no safety plan. So, like, I'm not that worried about the, like, Skynet scenario where they're all mad and they try to extinguish the species. Like, I don't think that's really going to happen. But I do worry that the AI, as it gets more powerful, becomes a more and more dangerous tool in the hands of bad actors. And that we don't have AI that can calculate the consequences of its actions. And that's what we really need, is to have AI be mandated by law and be empowered by software to figure out the consequences of its actions and to not do things if they're going to be grossly harmful.
So you like the war games ending better than the...
I mean, the best way to play is not to play at all.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not arguing against building AI, but I think we should recognize that the AI that we have right now is premature, that it's not well controlled, that we don't know how to guarantee that it's safe, and that it's very different from other technologies. Like when somebody builds a bridge, we now have the engineering down on that. We don't just build a bridge randomly. So most bridges stay up. Or look at what we do with commercial airlines. They're incredibly safe. I just saw something, there's one passenger fatality per light year traveled. I mean, that's mind-bogglingly safe. And so we know how to do that. We don't know how to do that with AI, but we're just rushing it out, to hundreds of millions of people. That's crazy.
I've heard you say this before, and every time I've wanted to ask you this question. So you think that the Tesla auto driving software should be illegal today?
I think it should only be tested under control. Well, first of all, let's be clear about one thing. The Tesla stuff is only driver assist. So people talk about level 5 self-driving where a car would actually go on its own. And I just saw something about maybe one trial that Tesla's doing. But basically what Tesla is actually doing is driver assist. And the problem with Tesla is that they call it full self-driving and it's not. That's fundamentally misleading.
So the Waymo that I was in, without...
Waymo is different. So Waymo has genuinely self-driving cars. Even there's an asterisk, which is we don't know how many people are in teleoperation centers. So it just turned out that Cruise had teleoperation centers that had more people than they had cars on the road. They had like, I think the numbers were like 1,000 cars on the road and 1,500 teleoperators. And so like, we don't really know from the outside what's going on. This is one of the reasons we need transparency. Is like, how can you intelligently evaluate, is it worth doing these experiments on public roads if you don't even know what it is that they're actually testing? Like, it's a serious problem. Waymo is clearly the best of all of these systems. My understanding is it kind of actually works in San Francisco and in Phoenix, but that it's very tied to very detailed maps, not just physical maps, but like logical maps of what do people do in particular places. So you can't just take it and put it in Boston. Like, if you just took Waymo software, dropped it in Boston, it's going to have a lot of trouble. And so it's not really close to like a generally shippable software where like everybody in the world can do it. It's not like, you know, when I was a kid, I tested some Hershey's Twix bars, I think. I visited Hershey Park. And like, you can try that on 100 people, and if they all like it, you can just send it everywhere. A self-driving car is not like a Hershey Twix bar. Like, there's much greater risks there.
In Waymo's defense, I've driven in Boston. It's really hard.
I've driven in Boston, and it is really
hard.
And Waymo is not going to be up to the job. Or think about driving in Mumbai, where they have, you know, rickshaws or whatever that aren't in the training set. Like, last year, a Tesla drove into a jet. The jet was not in its training set. It was an airplane trade show. Somebody pressed summon to come across the parking lot, and it ran into a $3.5 million jet. Like, if it's not in the training set, these systems do not understand it. They don't have a general understanding of the world. They don't have a general understanding of physics, of money, of capital, of property, of people, anything. They just very narrow things, like how to stick to a lane, you know, when to recognize a bicycle. I'll tell you something. I used to frequently ride a unicycle in traffic in Manhattan. And I would not do that if there were self-driving cars, because the self-driving cars do not have unicycles in their databases. They would not know what to do with me.
Are there pictures of this?
There are pictures of me in Central Park unicycling. I don't know about just in
Juggling as well, or no juggling?
I've occasionally done both. Not in traffic, but yes.
Steve, what keeps you up at night when it comes to all these trends?
I think this is where we part company. I think it's going to be much faster than Gary does. I think it's already delightful to use, even in its silliness. I think it's.
You're the one who argues with it.
Yeah, well, I rage at it. Yes, it's going to get better really fast, and I think that about the time it makes our lives measurably better will be when we hand the keys to the robot and say, listen, just tell me where to go and what to do and what to eat and when to, like, we're already, I mean, we were talking about this on the way over here. It's like, I mean, digital mapping. I mean, the last time that I've had to understand where the computer tells me, make a left here, I follow along, okay, right? Stop that, now, hard to do in South by because they close and open the streets all the time. And Google Maps can't figure that stuff out. So if you're trying to drive, it'll send you to a street that's then blocked off. But I think the answer is about the time it seems like it solved the really bad, data apocalypse that we're living through now is when it gets really dangerous.
Gary?
I think it's already really dangerous. I think overestimating the speed at which it's moving is actually playing into the people who are raising all this money. So, the valuation of OpenAI is $86 billion. The cumulative profit so far is zero. There's a big gap there. And that big gap is largely premised on people believing that they're close to some magical thing that they're not. And so I think the magical thinking itself is leading to a massive power imbalance that's hurting society and is going to hurt it more.
That hurt a little bit. That was a little painful. I hear it, though.
So it was an interesting choice to pick me to be the moderator. I'm very much like an inclusion advocate and really driving, helping brands to really be much more inclusive and equitable in all the things that they do. How do we drive inclusion with all this work and bringing different voices to the mix?
There are a ton of non-white males doing really great work in AI. I think they're getting some attention. Like Rolling Stone did a wonderful profile on several. Like Abiba Rahana, I think, is a fantastic thinker about AI. Fei Li is obviously one of the leading scientists. Some of it is the narratives that media tells so often focus on the white guys who are running the big companies. And there's so many other people working in AI, but their stories are not told as much. And then, there's myth making about Jan LeCun, who leads Facebook, because like he has lots of money behind him. So, he leads Meta's AI division. So Meta will put out a press release about his brand new model, when in fact other people have been working on the same kind of thing.
You and he are close.
We're very close. That's sarcastic. So there is a lot of narrative and myth making about like the few geniuses. I mean, Sam Altman isn't even an AI researcher. He's a business guy. But you look in like Twitter influencers for AI, and he'll be like at the top of the list. And the media does nothing to correct that. So I mean, I think the media can play some role in reconstructing what the narratives are. And some of it is like politics and money that's hard to fight. I mean, it happens to be that the white males running the companies, are what they are, and by buying into their narratives, we're just empowering them more. The next generation of AI might well be developed much more by women than the current generation, right? There's a lot more women in the scene right now, but we're not giving enough oxygen to new approaches to AI, and so that's not helping with these issues.
I think two answers. One is data transparency and understanding where your data is going and being able to control it. But then the other thing too is we collectively have an enormous amount of power as users. And I think that for people that want to see brands and products and tests get support, for women to say, hey, here's a great AI researcher, and we're going to move our attention to that product. We're going to use that product. We're going to tell our friends about that product. I tell it to Gen Z all the time. Enormous economic power. And they're allowing themselves to, not allowing themselves, being mistreated, particularly by Instagram. Well, the way you fix that is by raising your hand and saying, unacceptable. Don't treat me that way.
I'm going to get to my last question, and then we're going to open it up to any questions from the audience. To both of you, what is the future of AI, and what is the future of truth?
I mean, that's still to be written. The reason I go giving talks and panels like this is because I think if we, the citizens, get involved and demand that we don't want AI to be a repeat of social media, that we can maybe land in a world where truth is still valued, and maybe land in a world where AI is safe instead of just whatever random stuff we happen to have right now.
I'm gloom. It may not be clear from this panel, but I'm gloomier than Gary on this. I think that AI is going to be in all of our lives. I think it's going to control where we work and who we love and where we drive and where we vacation and what we eat and which pharmacies decide that they're going to actually send us the medication that our doctor says we need to have. I think it's going to happen really fast. And I think that at the end of the day, the danger is it feels better when it's getting worse. And I think it's a 5-year time horizon, not a 10-year time horizon.
Well, thank you both. First question.
Nice. Nice panel. Thank you for all the discussion. I have so many questions, but it's like a combined question here. Why we are looking for the correct answer in AI? Because when we search in Google, for example, we know there is a lot of crap too, but we are filtering what we want, and when we are looking to AI, we are trying to get the right answer, like 2 + 2 is
There's actually
just because this leads me to the point is what we should teach our children and people to make better use of AI.
So there's actually a user interface problem with ChatGPT and systems like that, which is they promise the world and they can't deliver it. All Google search or traditional Google search promises is they'll give you some links and you can look them up. But ChatGPT conveys an authority as if it could answer everything.
That's right.
And that is really insidious. And it goes to the second part of your question, which is one of the things we need to teach our children, our parents, and everybody else in between is they pretend like they know this, but they are bullshit artists, and you cannot trust them. And it's going to take a long time for people to fully realize that. Like every day, somebody is like, "I typed this thing into ChatGPT, and you'll never believe it, but its answer was complete bullshit." I'm like, "Where have you been for the last year and a half when we keep trying to tell you that?"
But it delivers bullshit in a charming way.
Charming bullshit is still bullshit.
By the way, that's the tweet of the panel. It's right there.
Cool, thank you.
Hi, I was wondering, what are you more worried about? That population societies fall for deep fakes created by AI, or that they do not believe their eyes anymore, that they do not believe truth anymore?
I mean, I'm scared because I see both, and I'm trying to find a third thing to steer to. And what I see is one world where people are just massively lied to and believe it, and another world where people are massively lied to and don't believe anything. And neither of those are appealing outcomes. And I keep wondering what door number 3 is that, the only door number 3 that I see is like the 1980s when people did a lot of fact checking, and I don't know how to, where there were actually fewer voices but more careful voices in the media and so forth. And I don't know how to get to something like that.
So do you personally believe we all become nihilists and don't believe anything anymore?
I think we are headed towards that. I think that the consequence of a couple of years like the year that I think we're about to have is going to be nihilism. We'll be like, oh, I didn't believe this one, I didn't believe that one. And now when I tell you something that's true that you don't want to believe, you're going to say, well, that's just a deep fake. Or we've already seen actually a few legal cases where people had good video and somebody says, well, that's not true, it's deep fake. And they're lying about it. And everybody's going to realize this all the time. And that could well lead to a pretty bad nihilism.
You're talking about the public-facing interface that we're all playing with. I would argue the thing that's actually scarier are the things that are going on that you'll never see. So there's a whole conversation going on within the military about autonomous military weapons, in which the AI says, that's the target, it doesn't have to go, there's no human in the loop, there's nobody approving it, it's saying, it's been approved to go after these kinds of things, and these machines start to act on their own. You'll never see that stuff going on. That worries me a lot.
But by the way, the Senate had a bill which was supposed to outlaw AI without human in the loop in nuclear weapons, and it didn't pass. And that just blows my mind.
Hi, great talk. I have an issue with something you said, Gary, at the beginning, where you said that you believe the solution to the post-truth society was something like increased skepticism or something along that line. And in my understanding of political science, well-functioning democracies are resting on a sort of base of trust between people. And I've also seen research saying that if you increase skepticism against fake things, you also increase the skepticism against true things.
Yeah, but that's the worry that I'm expressing, is like...
Yeah, but then would really skepticism be the right cure?
I'm not at all promising that. I'm saying, in fact, that greater skepticism could lead us into total nihilism. Like, I think the natural response here is to say, well, okay, let's just teach everybody that every video that you see might be fake. And there is an argument for doing that, but there is an argument that that is going to lead us to this total nihilism. And I'm not sure that you have the kind of liquidity in information space to make democracy work if nobody believes anything. And so I'm very worried there.
Great. Then I misunderstood you.
Hi, thank you so much for the great talk. I have a question about ethics of the software engineers that design AI. I mean, in every other human domain, there's an ethical standard that, like scientists, journalists, doctors, everybody's held to a specific standard of truth, or moral or descriptive. I mean, is there any concern about vetting the Google AI engineer kids that are writing this code, and how, I guess, easy it is for descriptive statements that AI makes to subtly become prescriptive statements about what things ought to be? I mean, is there any guidelines, any kind of...
I would say there are no guidelines, that there's not a lot of training, and that on the particular issue that you're talking about, it's also not clear what we as a society actually want as the answer. So I think what we're going to see in the next couple of years is a lot of controversies like the one we saw last week with the Google stuff with the Apollo 11 astronauts who weren't the actual Apollo 11 astronauts and so forth. But it's not clear what society wants. On that particular case, you want a mix of historical truth and reality along with some kind of diversity towards a more positive future. But like getting people to agree on what they want around that is complicated. People are going to be like, I want my chatbot that gives me my truth and stuff like that. I don't know how that's going to be resolved. I don't know if teaching ethics to the software engineers is quite the right way to go about it, but I don't have an entire answer. I think we're going to see culture wars around AI, just like we've seen around politics, where people have really very different ideas about what they think even the right answer should be, which makes it hard to teach the ethics. That said, I think there's some ethical things that are pretty obvious, like machines should not do harm. And we don't have a tech industry that really has embraced that through and through, and perfectly happy to ship software that gets eyeballs if it harms society. And we should be teaching them that's not ethical, and we should be demanding that if it's not ethical, that they can't ship it.
I think it's exactly the right question, and I think the fact that we can't answer it with here are the ethical standards of this industry is at the core of the problem that we're concerned about. And I would just go back to the thing that is the kind of the North Star of what I think as a kid I read and have had etched in my brain ever since, which is Isaac Asimov and the 3 laws of robotics. I mean, why not start there? Maybe add a 4th.
I mean, the whole AI industry would shut down if people took seriously the notion, first, do no harm. They're just not taking it seriously. Move fast and break things is the opposite of first, do no harm.
Thank you so much.
You can tweet that one, too. That's a good one.
Thank you. I couldn't help but think of a comparison between like voter apathy that we have experienced for years just because of the inundation of information. So half of this country does not vote and never has voted just for the same reasons that we're talking about. They don't know what to believe, so they don't. But my question is, considering all the profit motives that you guys have explained for bad actors, good actors, the fact that there's no guardrails, and the impotency of Congress in general, is there any like spearheading effort by the government and artists and librarians and law and science and all of our intelligence factors or sectors to create these guardrails that are missing? And also, you mentioned how do we get involved? Is like a boycott by all of us even something that's realistic?
I read Gary's Substack. I'm not kidding. I mean, the answer is you want to find where kind of the moral center of this conversation is. I mean.
So I appreciate that. I'm working on a book called Taming Silicon Valley, which will come out in September. And I will have a website, which I don't have yet, called tamingsiliconvalley.org. And I'm going to try to make it a locus of all of this, of community activism, trying to get people to work on these issues. I mean, you asked a very broad question, and I don't have a full answer yet. I don't think that we, the people, have been organized enough. And part of the reason I wrote the book is to try to say, hey, we need to organize around this just like we organize around fair wages. It's just as important, maybe even more important, because if things go the way they are, there won't be wages for anybody at all. And so we do need to organize around these things. And again, I will try to make my book and the website that will come with it, Taming Silicon Valley, in September, a locus of this. And I need all the help I can get.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I guess mine is a little bit of a follow-up question to this is, I mean, that website and that book sounds fascinating, and obviously we need regulatory changes and safeguards and all these things. And I guess my question is, like, in your opinion, who are some of the people and perhaps advocacy groups, maybe youth advocacy groups, that are leading this conversation, maybe pressuring, their local legislator
There's
or federal?
a great youth group called Encode. Some of those people are here.
Encode Justice?
Encode Justice. I think that they're terrific. I don't know all the youth groups, but I think that they're quite good. And that's one place that exists now, and it is well worth checking out what they're doing. I've been helping them with some things. I just signed a letter that I think is going to go out. I think they're an excellent organization.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, thank you for the talk. So we have seen how this technology, and maybe that's one of the scary parts of this, is how fast and rapid the progress of this technology is taking place, right? We've seen this evolving at such a rapid pace that even for experienced AI practitioners, it's really hard to keep up with the newest developments, right? We've gone from, in 2 years, from generative AI that produced okay text all the way to capabilities that we are seeing in GPT-4 or the stable diffusion models, now recently with the announcement of Sora by ChatGPT. So this trend doesn't seem that it's going to be slowing down in the short term, particularly with all the money coming into this technology from venture capital and all that. So the question is, how do you think legislators and politicians will be able to keep up with this pace without always trying to catch up with the latest risk? And do you think there is any hope from politics to be the silver bullet, or is it ultimately on us, the citizens, to be the ultimate barrier to disinformation and the risks that these technologies
We
creating?
don't have too much time, so I'll take those two quickly. The citizens have to get involved. We cannot trust that the government is going to sort this out. The best thing the government could do is to build an independent agency, a cabinet-level agency that has responsibility for AI and that can keep up. The senators themselves cannot sit around and figure out how GPT-5 is different from GPT-4 and what we should do. When I was at the Senate, I made that point, and they all nodded their heads and said, yeah, we need an agency, we need, for the reasons of speed. So now, write to your Congress people and your senators and say, yeah, we need that agency because you guys aren't going to keep up, and I don't want that.
I think that's a good place to stop. We're actually at time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.